Hello, and welcome back to the Survivor's Mike podcast. I'm your host, Posh, and I'm glad that we made it to this episode. So, it's been a great week, and I just had this thought or topic that has been on my mind, that I've been pondering on, and it has something to do with expectations. And I know that we can have expectations on ourselves and we can have expectations on people, on society, governments, leaders. The list goes on and on our parents, on our children. But I just want to have a conversation with you on the expectations that you put on yourself. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because of the way I grew up, right? And I think this episode will serve as an intro. And just for context, my life is very, or has been very multifaceted. There have been a whole lot of different events that happened in my life, and I think the more we go, the more we proceed, I'll be unpacking some of those events depending on the situation and how it will be and how much or how far I can go in terms of sharing. But I grew up in an environment that I would call unhealthy for a child. Very, very abusive, very, very tormenting. And what that naturally did to me every time I was, physically abused or beaten or verbally abused, psychologically, and stuff like that. What that did to me was I naturally started, and it's interesting because it was my subconscious. I started preparing for my way out. I wanted out of the home. I wanted out of the city. I wanted out of the country, right? And so I started building all these ideas around what could possibly make me leave this place. So the very first obsession I had, I remember when I was younger, I started liking school. And so I was probably maybe a little bit above average of a student. I was considered bright, really, but not somebody that, the whole school would talk about. But I was good enough. I was, people could see that she's going somewhere, right? So my early high school obsessions became mathematics, interestingly. And really that obsession was just born out of a single, exam that we wrote, and I turned out to be on the top three. And since then, I started telling myself, "Oh, I'm good at this. I'm good at this." And I would talk to guys, and be very proudful about it, like, "Oh, I beat all of you when it comes to this." And so that's how that built up. And once that built up in me, the next thing that happens was, okay, if I'm good at school, that's going to be my ticket out of the house because eventually I'm going to have to go to university, right? And so I kept up with it and I started to really work so much hard. I think so much of my effort was put on mathematics other than any other, module or um, subject you would, whatever you call it, right? But what I didn't realize that created in me a serious obsession for success. I remember when I was younger, I literally my subconscious was picturing how I'm gonna be. I'm also somebody who loves fashion and looking great, and I would picture myself walking into, different kinds of rooms. And I mean, during that time, it really never crossed my mind that I could start my own business. So the thing I knew was, oh, I'm gonna work for United Nations, for example. And I would picture myself making, sitting in rooms that really matter, in positions of power and just making decisions that literally impact humanity. And I'm talking as young as maybe 9, 12 years old, because the mathematics obsession came later on. I was, in high school by then, but way before that in primary school, I already had these thoughts because, my childhood abuse started around the age of 4, 5 years old. And it just went on and on and on. So by the age of 6, 7, I was already a very bitter child. But this is something that we will get to talk about as we go, depending on how much I will share about it. So, and you know what that does to you in your mind, you think you're very goal oriented, you're very driven. You are separated from the rest, because I mean, really, everybody else around me is kind of be like, okay, I'm gonna just do this and that, get employed, and then I'm gonna become a mother, get married to my high school sweetheart, whatever it can be. And my focus was really, because relationships were very tough for me, because trusting people was just not natural. It never really came naturally for me. And of course, I was in relationships the more I grew up, but they were very complicated and none of them worked. And like most people, I literally tell my friends that I'm not at liberty to talk about my previous relationships and previous partners as the bad people, because I feel like I was the one who was ruining things, or at least the way I thought. I naturally was that person, and I think some few traits of that, they really rubbed off me in the recent years. I was always somebody who was preparing for the worst case scenario and how I would heal from that. you know it was always like that. And every time something great comes up, you're already like 2 times ahead, planning, okay, this is too good. When all this crashes down, how am I going to heal from it? you know and now I laugh about it, but it was really a tiring journey to work on my mindset, to train myself on how to adapt and how to live, right? So I said all this to say relationships were always something that I wanted, but I never focused on it. I think I naturally had concluded, okay, this is really not my area. It never works, so I don't quite care. But I was very obsessed on the success part of things. I wanted to, I don't think I ever told anybody or I ever mentioned that I wanted to be rich. I wanted to be wealthy. I literally pictured myself as the most successful person that you would ever find, right? And so I grew up with that. And school was really my thing. I was making so much effort to make sure I pleased my dad. And then, I mean, he was not a difficult person. I really am grateful to him. He was amazing. But, I wanted him to send me to school. And so I did well, in my primary years, in my high school years. Of course, I made it to university. And for me, that was like, okay, welcome to freedom. So while is the abuse part of things kind of like dropped off me, because I'm not physically in that environment where all that was happening, or at least I could choose when to be home and when not to be home. And most of those times, honestly, it was when my dad's health is not great. If he's sick, then I have to be home. But if everything is fine, talk to me on the phone, I'm okay. And I just realized that the second thing that I put expectation on was, if things are not going great, you move to the next location. Location was a big thing for me. So all the years that I was working so hard to be good at school, I was making those efforts because I wanted to change my environment, because in my head I told myself, if I'm out of here, just as long as I'm out of here, it's gonna solve everything. And I find myself doing the same even until now. I'm like, oh, Jesus, I can't breathe with the bureaucracy because I live in Germany. I'm like, oh God, well, what's the next location, right? And I became really open to just switching and changing overnight. I'm like very open to going anywhere and changing, like just changing literally my whole life. It's really something that comes to me. And it's interesting because I realize in the end, I feel how tired I am because it's tiring. Man, who loves just relocating over and over again? I relocated when I was 25 years old to a whole different continent, culture, language, you name it. But I became so open to that because I taught myself that you want to fix it, you just change the environment. And then came in the success issue, which the more I grew up, because initially I'm told or I learn that you're good in school, you get good grades, you're gonna be successful. And then I get to that level and I do all these things on the list, and then I'm there, I'm still like, I don't think this is it. And then I build another expectation and then I'm running and chasing on achieving that. And then I get to that stage again. I mean, it's the same thing as coming to Europe, right? Because the ideology is, okay, if there are no opportunities in my country, because I'm originally Zimbabwean, I'm African, if there are no opportunities, then I'm gonna move to where opportunities are, until you come to Germany and then they tell you, oh, you need to learn the language, you need to go to a German school and get, our education, do this, do that, do that. You do all of it and still the door is like shut, right? And I think one of the biggest things that crashed my beliefs on all these expectations I had put is really it, I wrote about it because the podcast has a newsletter on Substack, and I wrote about that story. I think I would do another episode over that, where a company literally hired me, and to me this was like, oh my god, finally my feet are in the industry, because that's what you also told. Yeah, you need just your first job, you need just an internship. Once you do that, it's going to open every other door, and I think it tends to be correct for some people, but it's not for everyone. And then 2 days before my starting date, they canceled that contract. I remember since the day I got that acceptance call, or email, whatever you would call it, I never slept. I was picturing myself being this engineer that I've always wanted to be, and finally I'm in the right industry, because it was semiconductor industry. It's a German company. It's going to be a great name on my CV. And I have this whole list of all these things I'm going to do when I move into that city, how much impact I'm going to make when I start working for the company. And 2 days before, they cut it off. How do you walk away from that? It had already been 3 decades of my life preparing for something like that. It didn't start when I was in Germany. The preparation of that started when I was in my little room looking at my ceiling after being beaten by my stepmother and being told horrible things about how much I can never achieve anything. The journey started when I was 6 years old, before I even left my country, before I even became a teenager. I was preparing just for that. So, how do you walk away from the reality that the expectation you set for yourself, you might not see the day that that will come true? Would you live with that? Would you be okay with that? Because, you know, acceptance and trying to live life and walk through situations just because you have no other option, they are two different things. Because when I'm living through it just because what else can I do, it's bitterness building up in me. But on the other side of that is acceptance. When you look at yourself and you're like, okay, this is my life. Why is my life like this? And again, you don't ask yourself the why is my life like this to torment yourself, because let's be honest, most of the times you don't even get the answer why. But probably you would look at it and ask yourself, one of the questions I ask myself is, What is it that I really wanted when I was 7 years old, 8 years old, and I suffered, wetting my bed sheets at night because I was a traumatized kid. But then for everybody else around me, it was a reason to laugh because we were kids. And why is a grown girl still peeing in the sheets, right? And nobody else would understand me on that. But now that I'm here, I ask myself, what is it that child who was embarrassed in school, what is it that she needed that I could offer to another child today, right? And I think the idea of living with trauma is it's really takes grace for you to be able to think about other people, because most of the times you're really, and I do the same. I do the same. I'm not even putting blame on anybody. It's just very difficult because you feel like your life already is a lot. There's no space to think about anybody else. When I started doing, collaborations with a few organizations about opportunities for women, or opportunities for black people and stuff like that, I had to take all this data that I've been collecting, all this discrimination that has been happening to me over the years I've been here, or at least even when I was still back in my country, because I'm still a woman, right? It's a different dynamic when you come to Germany. There are now two things for for two reasons for people to discriminate you. You are not from here, you're black, and then you're a woman, right? How do I position myself to have a conversation with a girl child who is very obsessed about her ideas, about her competences, about her hopes, and how much she pictured the future? How do I get to prepare her to know and understand that it's a 50-50 situation? This might work or maybe not. And if I can have a conversation like that, by the time we finish that conversation, is she going to be able to accept that she can put as much work as she can, but there are things that she might not be able to control herself, right? So this was just a little bit of an intro, because I know that the previous episodes have not been that deep. I think this is the deepest one, sorry, that we have had so far. But really, I it's just really something that I, over the years, I'm beginning to learn. And it's fascinating because I'm in my early 30s, and it's now that I'm finally getting to see the reality of life. Like, you can work as hard as you can, and yes, success is very possible. But what do you do if it doesn't work, because your life doesn't stop? How do you prepare yourself for those uncertainties? How do you prepare yourself for not seeing those expectations coming to pass? And I'll be so happy if you guys can have conversations with me on Substack. That's where I write articles about the podcast. And sometimes it doesn't always match the topics that I talk about on the episodes and what I write about on the newsletter. But I just really want to have these conversations with you. And so you would find that newsletter on Substack, and it's still called The Survivor's Mic. And the publications, they air every Monday, because I believe that, as the week begins, we need something to ponder on as the week goes by. And we get to brace ourselves for the week and empower ourselves again. And or otherwise, we can have conversations on TikTok. It's still the Survivor's Mic podcast. So I will end this with saying, whether or not you get to see the day where your success story comes to pass, or you don't, I want you to know that you didn't do anything wrong. You put as much effort as you did, which will help you to not regret it. You are doing as much as you can. And if it doesn't, you still need to find a way to live with it. And so, how do you do that? We might not have all the answers on how to move past whatever we had planned for ourselves, but just starting the conversation and just starting to find things that we love, things that we enjoy, not to replace what we have always wanted, because it's okay to want something, but to be able to say, if it doesn't come, I'll still be able to live life because there's that and that and that that I love from the bottom of my heart. And I'm okay living for that. I'm okay living for those things. I'm okay doing or having access to this and that, even though I might not be able to hold that other thing that I've always wanted to have. So, thank you so much for being here. And I'm looking forward to having another conversation with you next week. I'm your host, Posh. Bye for now.